Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share creepy Reddit horror stories. First story. This story was shared by you/Gaitenkas 2007. How I survived and killed a Wendigo. My family was shocked when we heard our Uncle Benjamin was found dead in the woods surrounding his vacation home. I didn't know him very well, as he lived far away from most of the family. So, I only saw him at family meetings. His funeral wasn't a big event. There were my two aunts, Lucy and Laura, my other uncle Stephen and my little nephew, Mikey. In Ben's will was written that I got his vacation home. I figured that it was nice to spend some time in a place where there was no distraction, as I had to study for my exams. Also, if I would rent a small apartment, I would probably have to live off instant noodles and water for a few months. The day after the funeral I packed up my things so that I could move to my new home. The drive itself was uneventful, though I did underestimate the length of the drive. When I was driving through the woods, I thought that I saw a face or two amongst the trees, but I just blamed it on my mind for being a bit sleepy, as it was around 11 p.m. when I arrived. Once I was there, I put all the food I had in the fridge and made my bed so I could sleep. When I woke up the next day I showered, made some breakfast, and hopped in front of the TV to watch a show on Netflix. Halfway through my show I thought I heard barking coming from the woods but didn't think anything of it as I thought it was coming from my show. However, the barking did not stop, so I decided to check it out. I walked a bit in the direction I thought it was coming from, but I couldn't find anything. So, I shrugged and walked back. The rest of the day was uneventful. I did however sort out a few moving boxes. As it was getting kind of late, I decided to watch one more episode of my show and head to bed afterwards. The next day started off normal. I showered, ate breakfast, and started to unpack a few boxes. However, around 10 a.m. I heard it again, barking. This time I knew it wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me, as I heard it loud and clear. I directly stopped unpacking and went to investigate the noise. When I went into the woods, to check out the sound, I found a tiny Labrador pup. It was covered in mud and scratches. I knew I couldn't just leave him there, so I took him home. I gave him a bath to get all the mud and filth off him, and then I took him to the closest vet, which was about 5 miles away. Once we arrived, I took a seat in the waiting room. I couldn't help but notice that the other people in the room had a small look of judgment towards me. I totally understood why, as the pup looked like he had been attacked. When it was our turn, I heard a soft whimper coming from the pup, but he did decide to walk with me to the room. After a few checkups the vet asked me if I owned the pup. I said no and that I found him in the woods. The vet went quiet for a second and asked me if I wanted him to check for a chip. I said yes and the vet checked, but found no chip. So, I suggested that if he didn't belong to anyone, I could take care of him. The vet sighed and went to get the papers for me to fill in, so I could take the pup home. On the way home I went to the local pet store, to buy some toys, food and a food and water bowl. After buying all the stuff I would need to take care of him, I thought of a name for him. After about 5 minutes of thinking I came up with the perfect name. Winston. I called out. Winston directly jumped up from his seat and started barking and wagging his tail. When we got home, I directly put everything in place. I put his dog bed next to the couch with some toys, and his food and water bowl in front of the TV. After that long day I was very tired, so I decided to watch a few episodes of my show. When I sat down, Winston started whining whilst wagging his tail. I asked, "Do you want to sit next to me?" He answered the question with a happy growl and jumped on the couch beside me. I watched TV until it was around 10 p.m. and decided to go to bed. I decided to put Winston's bed in the bedroom next to me for the first night, so that he could get used to the house. When I woke up the next morning, I noticed that Winston's bed was empty and that the bedroom door was open. I thought that he had walked through the door to watch the birds through the giant window in the living room. However, when I went to check, I didn't see him. But then I noticed that the front door was wide open, even though I knew I locked it the previous night. My heart dropped, I panicked and ran out of the door to find him. After about 20 minutes of searching, I finally found him with a leaf he found in his mouth. I picked him up and carried him inside. It was near lunch time, so I decided to put a frozen pizza in the microwave. I was very hungry as I hadn't eaten anything for breakfast. After eating, I took Winston for a walk, but he kept on looking into the tree line, as if something were there. Each time I thought he saw something, I looked, but couldn't see anything. After about 10 minutes of walking, I decided to head back to the house. I am glad I made that decision, because right after I closed the door behind us it started storming. The sky became a brown/yellow color, and I could see the clouds rolling over. I'd seen this weather only once before. I was visiting a friend that moved to the Netherlands, then I first saw this type of weather. I decided to make some hot chocolate for myself and sat down on the couch, to binge-watch my show for a while. Winston was sleeping right next to me. After a while I fell asleep too, but I was awakened by Winston, whining by the front door. I decided to check up on him and noticed that he was shivering from fear. I looked through the window of the front door and saw nothing. I figured it was some deer walking by, that had spooked the little pup. I picked Winston up and carried him to the couch, so I could cuddle him to ease his nerves. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to do an early morning walk with Winston. After walking a bit, I saw a pack of deer just roaming around in an open area in the forest. This only reinforced my thought of Winston being scared from some deer just roaming around on our property. However, when we came back from our walk, I noticed something different about the front door. Scratch marks. Upon closer inspection I saw that the scratches were massive. They were all about 10 inches long and 1 inch deep. Now I'm no expert in forest animals, but I dang well knew that those didn't belong to a deer. I decided to call a door repairman to fix it. They arrived about 30 minutes. "Those are some massive marks on your door, bud," one of the men said. "Yeah, I would get something for protection if I were you," the other one said. I followed his advice and later bought a small pistol, to protect myself and Winston. After I got back from the gun store the men were already done with the door. I gave them a "thank you," and they left. The following day started off normal. I woke up, had an early shower, and decided to do another early walk with Winston. I saw 2 squirrels fighting over some pine cones, a flock of birds flying in the opposite direction of my house, and I think I spotted a small mouse running through the freshly fallen leaves. However, Winston was shivering against my leg, whining. I asked what was wrong and he basically jumped. I decided then and there to head back. I heard something growl in the distance and another flock of birds flew in the opposite direction of the sound. When I was back on my property, I noticed something weird. My front door was ripped from its hinges and was lying about 3 meters to the left. I directly pulled my pistol out of my pocket because I didn't know if, who or whatever, had left yet. When I walked into the house, I froze. There were scratches everywhere. Whatever had done this, had enormous claws. Upon closer inspection I noticed that the claw marks were the exact same as the ones on the door from yesterday. I also noticed that my fridge door was hanging from its hinges. When I looked in the fridge, I saw that it was a mess. All the meat was gone, and all the drawers were ripped out of the fridge. I put the front door back in its place using the tools I had recently unpacked and fixed up the fridge. After I was done, I decided to take a little break, so I sat on the couch with my drink. After a while I moved my arm only to touch something wet and squishy. I jumped and looked at what I had touched. It was the body of a squirrel, well, at least what was left of it. The squirrel was mangled in gruesome ways. A part of its skull was missing, its intestines were hanging out of its stomach and its hind legs were broken. However, it didn't bleed anymore. I guess all the blood was soaked into the couch. I cleaned up the blood and buried the squirrel. I put a small stick on the grave as a sign of respect. After that I decided it was time to pack my things. When I was about halfway done with putting everything in boxes it was already late in the evening. I figured it wouldn't hurt to stay here one more night, but I was very wrong about that. I was woken up by Winston. He had jumped on the bed to hide with me. He was shivering and whining because he sensed that something was wrong. I stood up. Winston let out a bark to warn me. God, I should have listened. I went to the front door as Winston was looking right at it. I looked through the window and saw something big. It looked like a deer, but I knew it wasn't one. It had massive antlers and a skull-like face, and the smell, oh God, the smell. It smelled like a corpse that had been rotting out in the sun for days. When I heard another bark coming from Winston, the thing looked up and tried to smash the door with its head. I directly pulled out my pistol and fired 2 shots. The thing howled in pain and ran away. After that thing ran away, I began to grab my stuff. I grabbed the most important things that I would need, picked up Winston and ran to my car. When I opened the car door, I heard the thing let out a cry behind me. I didn't look back. I hopped in my car and drove off. I'm glad that there wasn't much traffic on the road, as I was going about 90 miles an hour. I mean, can you really blame me for it? I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. While driving to get out of the woods, I saw the trees flash by. It reminded me of the first night I got here, however it looked much different in the daytime. It also reminded me of the face I had seen amongst the trees. I now know it wasn't my mind playing tricks on me that night, as the face I had seen looked exactly like the face of that thing. Lost in thought, I wasn't paying much attention on the road, however I was directly awakened by the sudden movement in the trees. When I looked towards the movement I jumped in my seat. That thing suddenly jumped in front of my car. I screamed. The creature looked at me and lunged towards me. I slammed the gas pedal and drove around the creature. It stared right at me with its hollow eyes as I drove past. 4 hours later I was back in my hometown. I figured I would go to my aunt and Uncle Lucy and Stephen. But then I remembered that Mikey was allergic to dogs. So, I went to my other Aunt Laura. I figured that she would like the company of me and Winston because of the sudden passing of her brother. I texted her. I was coming over and that I was taking my new friend with me. She told me that it was nice for me to come over, but then she asked me why I would drive all that way just to see her. I told her that I would explain when I got there. After about 20 minutes of driving, I arrived at her place. She opened the door and looked at my face. "What's wrong, sweetie?" she asked me. I guess I was still looking a bit frightened after today's events. I asked if we could go inside. She agreed and we sat on the couch. "Is that your new friend?" she asked, looking at Winston. I told her yes and that his name was Winston. "That's a cute name," she said. Then she asked why I was here and why I looked so pale. I told her everything. I told her about Winston, about that monster and about all the weird stuff that happened. She went silent for a bit. Then she asked me if I could describe the appearance of the thing. I told her about the antlers, the skull-like face, and the smell. After I told her about it, she looked terrified. She told me that my uncle called her multiple times about a giant creature roaming around on his property, and the next day he was found dead near his vacation home. She then told me that there were massive claw marks on his corpse and that he was hanging from his intestines, which were pulled out of his stomach. I was shocked. I asked if she had a laptop or computer I could use. She said yes and that she would go and get it for me. She came back with her old laptop and gave it to me. I opened Google and searched for the creature. After about 10 minutes of searching I found out what kind of creature it was. It was called a Wendigo. After reading some bit, I knew that the creature that had attacked me was a Wendigo. I told Lara and she was as pale as a ghost. We talked some more about all the events of the past week, but after about 20 minutes Winston started whining. My aunt just chalked it up to Winston still being young, but I knew that wasn't the case. I told Lara that we needed to go, and she asked why. I told her that there was no time, but she insisted that she was going to stay. Then she looked at the window. Looking back through the kitchen window was the Wendigo. She screamed. I tried to run after her, but she was too fast. She ran out of the front door, only to face the Wendigo. What happened next will haunt me for the rest of my life. The Wendigo opened its mouth and roared. Then it unhinged its jaw and bit her head clean off. Winston almost ran out of the door, but I picked him up just in time. The creature looked at me and grinned. I could still see pieces of my aunt on its teeth. I ran for the back door and out on the street. I didn't stop running, until I could taste blood in my mouth. After checking if everything was safe, I collapsed underneath an oak tree. I was woken up in the morning by Winston. After remembering what had happened the previous day, I started crying. Winston curled up beside me to ease my nerves. "I'm glad you're here with me, buddy," I said. After fully waking up, I figured that the best thing to do was to go back to my car and drive far away from here. However, when I was back at Aunt Lara's house, I saw that my car was turned into a wreck. The windows were smashed, the metal had been turned into shreds and one of my car doors was hanging loose. I checked the back seat and saw that my bag was intact. I had left all my money in the bag, so it was nice that I still had it with me. After grabbing my bag, I headed towards the shopping mall to buy some food, as I had left all my food in the vacation house. While walking, I realized that the Wendigo had most likely followed me. I decided to head to the library to learn more about the beast, mostly on how to get rid of it. When I entered, the nice librarian greeted me. I asked if there were any books about the Wendigo. She told me that she would check, and I gave her a thank you. After a while she told me that there were 2 books in the horror section and 1 in the mythology section. I thanked her and headed to the horror section to find them. After searching for about 8 minutes, I found them. Once I was done, I headed to the mythology section to find the last book. Then I headed to the exit. The librarian asked me if I had a pass and I told her no, but that I had money. She scanned the books and I left. I decided to head to the grocery store afterwards, as I noticed it was lunchtime already. I bought a sandwich for myself and some treats for Winston. I texted her. I was coming over and that I was taking my new friend with me. She told me that it was nice for me to come over, but then she asked me why I would drive all that way just to see her. I told her that I would explain when I got there. After about 20 minutes of driving, I arrived at her place. She opened the door and looked at my face. "What's wrong, sweetie?" she asked me. I guess I was still looking a bit frightened after today's events. I asked if we could go inside. She agreed and we sat on the couch. "Is that your new friend?" she asked, looking at Winston. I told her yes and that his name was Winston. "That's a cute name," she said. Then she asked why I was here and why I looked so pale. I told her everything. I told her about Winston, about that monster and about all the weird stuff that happened. She went silent for a bit. Then she asked me if I could describe the appearance of the thing. I told her about the antlers, the skull-like face, and the smell. After I told her about it, she looked terrified. She told me that my uncle called her multiple times about a giant creature roaming around on his property, and the next day he was found dead near his vacation home. She then told me that there were massive claw marks on his corpse and that he was hanging from his intestines, which were pulled out of his stomach. I was shocked. I asked if she had a laptop or computer I could use. She said yes and that she would go and get it for me. She came back with her old laptop and gave it to me. I opened Google and searched for the creature. After about 10 minutes of searching I found out what kind of creature it was. It was called a Wendigo. After reading some bit, I knew that the creature that had attacked me was a Wendigo. I told Lara and she was as pale as a ghost. We talked some more about all the events of the past week, but after about 20 minutes Winston started whining. My aunt just chalked it up to Winston still being young, but I knew that wasn't the case. I told Lara that we needed to go, and she asked why. I told her that there was no time, but she insisted that she was going to stay. Then she looked at the window. Looking back through the kitchen window was the Wendigo. She screamed. I tried to run after her, but she was too fast. She ran out of the front door, only to face the Wendigo. What happened next will haunt me for the rest of my life. The Wendigo opened its mouth and roared. Then it unhinged its jaw and bit her head clean off. Winston almost ran out of the door, but I picked him up just in time. The creature looked at me and grinned. I could still see pieces of my aunt on its teeth. I ran for the back door and out on the street. I didn't stop running, until I could taste blood in my mouth. After checking if everything was safe, I collapsed underneath an oak tree. I was woken up in the morning by Winston. After remembering what had happened the previous day, I started crying. Winston curled up beside me to ease my nerves. "I'm glad you're here with me, buddy," I said. After fully waking up, I figured that the best thing to do was to go back to my car and drive far away from here. However, when I was back at Aunt Lara's house, I saw that my car was turned into a wreck. The windows were smashed, the metal had been turned into shreds and one of my car doors was hanging loose. I checked the back seat and saw that my bag was intact. I had left all my money in the bag, so it was nice that I still had it with me. After grabbing my bag, I headed towards the shopping mall to buy some food, as I had left all my food in the vacation house. While walking, I realized that the Wendigo had most likely followed me. I decided to head to the library to learn more about the beast, mostly on how to get rid of it. When I entered, the nice librarian greeted me. I asked if there were any books about the Wendigo. She told me that she would check, and I gave her a thank you. After a while she told me that there were 2 books in the horror section and 1 in the mythology section. I thanked her and headed to the horror section to find them. After searching for about 8 minutes, I found them. Once I was done, I headed to the mythology section to find the last book. Then I headed to the exit. The librarian asked me if I had a pass and I told her no, but that I had money. She scanned the books and I left. I decided to head to the grocery store afterwards, as I noticed it was lunchtime already. I bought a sandwich for myself and some treats for Winston. After eating, I decided to head to the local park to walk Winston. I walked about 10 minutes, until I found a bench and decided to sit down and read the books I bought. When I opened the first book, I directly looked up on how I could kill the beast. When I couldn't find anything, I opened the second book. After looking, I didn't find anything either. I opened the last book that I had gotten from the mythology section. When I searched, I found information on how to kill the Wendigo. I directly went to the page and read that I needed silver bullets or a silver weapon. I remembered that there was a gun store about 1 mile away, so I decided to pack my things and head in that direction. When I entered the store, I asked if they had silver bullets. They told me they had and that they would go and look for me. Sometime later they came back and put a small box on the counter in front of me. I knew that it was going to be pricey, but I had enough money to buy 10 bullets. I also bought a new gun, as I figured that my pistol was too small to even fit the bullets. After I made my purchase, I walked out of the door and was greeted by Winston, who was wagging his tail happily. I told him that we were finally safe and that I was going to protect him no matter the cost. He let out a bark of joy and we walked off. After my little trip to the gun store, it was almost evening. I knew I had enough time to get ready for the fight with the Wendigo. I put 3 of my bullets in the gun and waited. After about 6 minutes of waiting, Winston started whining. I knew then and there that the beast was close. I stood up and turned off the safety of my gun. I heard the thing roar in the distance. I looked in the direction of the sound, and there it was, the Wendigo. I immediately fired 2 shots and the beast howled out in pain and it started charging towards me. I fired another shot, which gave me enough time to reload. I put another 3 bullets in the gun and fired all of them a second later. One of the bullets had hit its leg and another its eye. It collapsed and it cried out in pain. Winston started throwing a barking fit, which agitated the beast more, but it couldn't do anything as one of its legs was broken. I loaded another 3 bullets in the gun and fired the final 3 shots right into its heart. It fell unconscious, but I knew it wasn't dead as I had read that I needed to cut the heart out. I grabbed my survival knife and walked towards the hell spawn. I stabbed the rest of its legs and slit its throat, then I began carving in its chest to get to the heart. After about 20 minutes of cutting, I had finally cut out the heart. I put the heart in my bag and headed back to Winston. Winston was hiding on the other side of the rock, where I had waited for the beast. Once he heard my voice call out, he started sprinting towards me. I kneeled and he started giving me kisses. I cleaned my hands in the nearby lake and we headed towards the nearest motel to sleep. When I woke up the next day, I showered, had breakfast, and headed to the nearest church so I could bury the heart. When I showed it to the nuns there, they escorted me to a burial place. I grabbed a shovel and started digging. After about 5 minutes of digging, I had created a big enough hole to bury the heart in. I put the heart in the hole and closed it. Then I went to the nearby field to pick 2 flowers. An ox-eye daisy for my uncle and a buttercup for my aunt, as it was her favorite flower. I walked back to the grave and placed down the flowers. I then went to my Aunt Lucy and my Uncle Stephen. I told them about everything. When I was done talking, they were speechless. I couldn't blame them, as I knew that the story would shock them. After they processed the story, they asked me if I was okay. I told them that I was still a bit shocked from everything that has happened. After we were done talking, they showed me the room I could stay in and then asked me if I could keep Winston away from Mikey, as he was allergic. I told them that it would be no problem as Winston was very well behaved. After we had lunch together, I asked if they had a laptop I could use. Uncle Stephen went to get it for me, as me and my aunt chatted for a bit. A minute later Stephen came back with a laptop and handed it over to me. I then excused myself from the table and went to my room, where I began typing this story, to get this message out to everyone. All I have to say is this. Listen to your instincts. It saved my life and I believe it could also save many others as well. If you notice some strange things in the woods, get out of there as quick as you can, it's hunting you. Second story. This story was shared by you/gingersnap0422. Possible Wendigo encounter. First time poster, long time lurker. For some context, I live in Jersey in a somewhat wooded area by the bay. There is a small patch of woods that separates my house from the home behind us that you can easily see through to their backyard, and our neighbor on both sides have fences. The one on the left has a full fence that spans the length of the property, and the neighbors on the right have a fence that goes down halfway the property so you can see into their backyard. We have never had any issues with the wildlife aside from some coyotes in the area, but they have never entered our property. I usually have to leave early in the morning before the sun comes up, and this particular morning was no different. I walked out to my car and heard what I thought was my next-door neighbor, which I found odd as I've never heard them awake this early. Before I entered my car I heard a noise that sounded like my neighbor saying, "Hey," coming from the right side of our backyard. I turned my head to look and I see two glowing eyes looking back at me. I could tell it was tall, but I couldn't make out any other details, but I knew it wasn't human. I never lost eye contact with it until I got in my car. I tried to pull my car so the headlights could shine on what I saw, but it was gone. Now every time I go out to my car at night or early in the morning I hear strange noises coming from the woods around my house. Some of the noises sound exactly like small children. I'm not sure what I encountered, but it scared the hell out of me. Third story. This story was shared by you/ghostskin5000. I am a psychologist. My patient has Wendigo psychosis. John had been my patient for months. I couldn't label him using official DSM codes. But he appeared to have what is known as Wendigo psychosis. At the time of my initial assessment, there wasn't any direct evidence that he tasted human flesh, although I could tell it was a significant preoccupation with him, and suspected him in the creation of several recent grisly scenes. "Just admiring the artwork in your office," John said to me one day. He grinned, letting me see the teeth he filed down to fine points. "So much red. I wonder if we're alike, you and I." I swallowed nervously. I couldn't report his Wendigo psychosis to the authorities though, because I would be perceived to be just as crazy as him. I couldn't even say he's a cannibal, even though he's come out and said his greatest fantasy is to devour a person over the course of 3 days. There was no proof. "So much red," John repeated. "Like a sea of blood making its way to your kitchen table." He grinned again, seeming even more unstable. "This has to stop, John. Right now, there's no direct evidence linking you to the murders, but if you keep eating people, your actions will eventually catch up to you. You haven't reported me yet." "No evidence." "No, I think it's because you like me. Deep down, you like me, David Morrison." "Why? Why the hell would I like someone like you?" "I can't prove it, but I know you are a murderer. Not just that, a monster." John put a hand admiringly to his heart. "You really think that about me?" "Yes, I do. I'd like to talk about your parents, John." My session with him ended a few minutes later, and I drove to the park, taking in the beauty of summer before heading home. My wife had gone on a business trip, so I had the place to myself. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. I popped on the TV. Hannibal was on, but I stopped myself from changing the channel. For some reason, I had become intrigued by monsters. For some reason, I shook my head. The reason was clear. John. I put dinner in the oven, a chicken stuffed with carrots and onions. While that cooked, I decided to go into the basement, do some late spring cleaning. Turning on the light, I surveyed the pile of unruly boxes. A few cocoons struggled as they hung from the ceiling. Their inner cores were human, weak from neuroses or traumatic life events to the extent that they were willing to visit a lonely psychologist's house for free therapy. "You're happier this way," I said. "And you called me a monster," John replied for the cocoon of silk. I turned around, greeting John's sharp teeth and blood-red eyes. He looked like a droopy-eyed hunting dog. "Did you come to eat me, John?" John hesitated, then shook his head. "No. I'm here to learn from you. From the master. You've obviously found a perfect way to ensnare your victims. Teach me." So I showed John how I spun a spider's web from my own hands. I was afraid he would eat me at first, and even though he stared at me with those hungry, blood-red eyes, he left with a cocoon of silk over his left shoulder. The Wendigo told me later that he could give me the hunger, the fire in my gut which would illuminate the path of my soul. I asked who had sent him. He told me John did, because he was so very grateful for the bundle of human flesh I gave him. "A gift for a gift," the Wendigo said, disappearing into the basement gloom and leaving me alone with my thoughts. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/Zoophagus. Wendigo. I debated sharing this story for a while. The people who would have got angry if I did are mostly dead now though, and I don't think it's going to be popular enough for the rest of them to find it anyway, so, here goes. When I was a kid I grew up in this small town in South Dakota called Clearwater. It's not in the scenic, LOL, parts of South Dakota but on the Great Plains. There's nothing but flat, treeless grassland for miles. Clearwater had maybe just over 1,000 residents, just barely big enough to have a McDonald's. Being a rural town, there's all to do in Clearwater, but it used to have a state park that has since been permanently decommissioned. I say that in quotes because Lake Clearwater Park was barely bigger than 100 acres, and didn't consist of much more than a tornado shelter, a dock, an outhouse and some picnic tables. The lake is where all this shit went down. Most rural areas are full of legends and ghost stories, and Clearwater wasn't any exception. Every abandoned farmhouse is haunted, every light in the sky is aliens, but the most popular local legend was that of the Wendigo. We white kids didn't really hang out on the res and only had a second-hand knowledge of what an actual Wendigo is, but we took the name because it sounded cool. The Wendigo's shtick was that it could perfectly mimic any sound or voice it wanted, and would use it to lure victims to their deaths. Nobody ever actually claimed to have seen it, and we had no idea what it could possibly look like, but anyone who spent too much time outside alone would eventually come back with a story about how they totally heard it. There wasn't a lot of tree cover near Clearwater, save for the small but dense forests surrounding the lake. After the state decommissioned the park, they even hauled the sand away from the beach. Can you believe that shit? Like why? It became a prime candidate for the Wendigo's lair. The rumor was that the state shut the park down after the Wendigo pretended to be a crying kitten, and lured 2 small children to the dock and pulled them in and drowned them. There is a memorial plaque near the dock for 2 children who did die there, so that part is true, but it's more likely that it was a tragic accident in my opinion. I can only imagine what their parents felt like after their babies got turned into some bullshit ghost story. The park had been closed for a decade. I was going to high school at Clearwater High, go Pumas, and I had a little friend group made up of Jamie, her boyfriend Gabe, and Gabe's younger brother Noah. Out of these, me and Jamie are still alive, but Jamie has been in and out of hospitals for multiple suicide attempts. She hasn't spoken to me in years. I'm kind of afraid to reach out to her because I think bringing back the old memories will only make her worse. Anyway, there was a day in July we just could not decide what to do. There's only so many times you can drive to Sioux Falls for the weekend before it gets boring. Gabe gets the idea that we should go down to Lake Clearwater to explore the old park. We knew it was a hot spot for older teenagers to go make out or drink or smoke weed, so it's not like it was completely uncharted territory. So we piled into Gabe's dad's shitty little Buick and began the hour trek. As soon as we turned off onto the gravel road leading to the park, the radio quit. This is hardly scary even if you know the legends about the lake, so we made a big show of oohing over it. We messed with it a little but got only static. We eventually parked and got out. The place wasn't really maintained anymore, so it was full of weeds and thorns and tall grass. The rotten dock bobbed listlessly on the shiny water. It had been more or less completely taken over by grasshoppers and mosquitoes. But it was beautiful then, almost peaceful, slowly reclaimed by nature. Next to the lake there was a concrete spillway. It's basically just a big concrete hole dug next to the lake that the water is supposed to go in if it floods. There's a ramp leading from the lake to the concrete reservoir. The bottom of the reservoir is so full of dirt that trees and shrubs are growing in the bottom. We decided this overgrown spillway is the den of the Wendigo and started daring each other to go peek down into it. Jamie decided to go first. The ramp was covered in graffiti and full of cigarette butts, so it was obviously well used and not dangerous. She went down this ramp and peered over the edge into the reservoir, maybe 25 feet deep. I remember asking her something like, "See something you like?" and she looked at us and was just, "Don't you guys hear that?" So we listened. We could hear it too. Deep inside the reservoir we could hear the quiet but obvious sound of a radio playing in the bushes. We all climbed over the edge to look down, anxious to get a look at the famous Wendigo that terrorized the town. I remember telling Jamie she needed to go see what it was, and she turned to me all. And then the radio quit. Right when Jamie said it. We all climbed out, laughing that the Wendigo couldn't fool us and happy to have a story to tell. The spillway was covered in junk from other explorers, so of course it wasn't a huge stretch of the imagination to imagine someone sunbathing there who accidentally kicked their battery-operated radio down the ramp and couldn't get it back, just leaving it to play till it died. I still can't help but think we were really stupid not to have taken it seriously. We had our story, and if we left there it would have been okay. We all would have just had a stupid little blip to add to the local legends, and we could talk about it at school for a while and life would have just been fine. But we didn't leave it there. We wanted to go see the tornado shelter before we left. It was scary even when the place was open. It had to be the ultimate test of metal now. We were walking to the shelter when we realized that after the radio incident the whole place had just gone quiet. Like, no bugs or flies or wind. It was like a big, wet, hot blanket just got dropped on the whole park. We wouldn't be around for long, but we just had to see it. The shelter was made up of a small concrete building that was basically a staircase leading to a tiny underground bunker. The whole thing was covered in pink and black spray paint, with a crude monster drawing on the door. Noah opened the door and stuck his head in and then turned away from it and gagged. The inside of the thing absolutely reeked. Even if you've never encountered it before, there's something instinctive about that death smell. You know exactly what it is right away. Jamie and I looked at each other and loudly announced that we weren't going down there. Noah started closing the door when we heard it. It was a crying baby. It was coming from inside the tornado shelter. I remember the hair on my neck bristling, and I felt so cold even though it was a hot day. Me and Noah and Jamie looked at each other silently in shock. Gabe though. He was the rational one. The brave one. The one who would have saved a baby. The one to say, "Oh my God, don't you guys hear that?" I remember Jamie's voice shaking when she told him, "Gabe, no, please no." But down the stairs he went. He was such a good guy, such a brave guy. He disappeared down those steps and the crying stopped. We waited for him to come out, or say something, but the deep shadows beyond the doorway were silent. Noah opened the door and peered in as far as he could stand from the smell and started yelling for Gabe down the stairs, but there was still no answer. We were freaking out, we had no idea what to do, we couldn't even go for help because Gabe had the goddamn keys. We decided that if we all went down together maybe we had a fighting chance. Strength in numbers. We had to help Gabe. Noah pulled out his Zippo lighter and led the charge into the shelter. I felt something fall and hit me like drops of water. It wasn't water. It was maggots. Hundreds of them were crawling in the walls. The remains of animals covered the floor, the walls had been festooned in streams of red organs like party favors. Jamie started puking. The last thing I remember, right before it all went black, was the sound of a crying baby suddenly right behind me. I woke up in a field a few miles away from the park. I was filthy and dehydrated, but unharmed. I walked to the nearest road and flagged down a passing pickup. The old man in the driver's seat seemed shocked to see me, and took me to the police station. My mom showed up later crying and hugged me so tight I almost couldn't breathe. Nobody could tell me what happened except for this much: Gabe was dead. Noah and Jamie were still missing. I have no idea how I got out there. Maybe I ran until I passed out and repressed what happened, or maybe Jamie pulled me out. Maybe that fucking thing just wasn't hungry anymore. I'd been missing for nearly 48 hours. All I remember is waking up in a ditch. I never saw it. Jamie was found wandering by the highway a few hours later. Noah, or his body, was never found. The police refused to issue any public statements as to what killed Gabe, except that the official cause of death was homicidal violence. I was not allowed to attend the funeral. His parents blamed me and Jamie. I don't hold any grudges towards them. They lost 2 sons, but I was told that whatever damage there was, it was bad enough for Gabe not to have an open casket. I moved away shortly thereafter. There was nothing left for me in that town. Jamie had turned to hard drugs and self-harm and was sent away, and the rest of the school only viewed me as entertainment by then. I went to live with my cousins in Sioux Falls. I hadn't thought about Clearwater again until recently. Honestly, the whole thing had me pretty fucked up. I went back to visit my parents for the first time in a decade, and had made up my mind that I wanted to kill myself. Before doing the deed though, I wanted to go back, one more time, just to see if I could get anything resembling answers. I had nothing to lose after all. The old gravel road was still closed. The sign blocking the road has dented and faded, but the road beyond is full of grass and holes and is slowly being reclaimed by the earth. The one thing between Clearwater and that monster is a road closed sign. I pulled up to the sign and looked past it to the trees that slowly got thicker in the distance. Then my radio quit. I looked down at it and felt the silence settle. I pulled into reverse, turned around, and got the fuck out of Clearwater for the second time. I haven't returned since. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/Tendi_Trooks35. Whatever you do, do not read this story out loud. They might hear you. I cannot stress this enough. Do not read this story out loud. Do not mention anything about this story in any audible way. Pass this on via message through cyberspace only. It seems to be the only way to keep your distance without them finding you. Please, 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 for your own safety, do not say anything about this out loud, especially their name. Those that I'm referring to are known by a few names. Navajo culture refers to them as Yinaldlushii. Some natives in Canada, the northwestern coast, and the Great Lakes region tribes referred to them as Wendigos. I refer to them as skinwalkers. Call them what you will, but do not say any of their names out loud. I say this because they hear their name and respond to it the way a great white shark reacts to a drop of blood in the open ocean. It is not a simple hunt that the skinwalkers perform in a general direction of the audible name. It is an instinct. A drive so animalistic that it is ingrained in every single one of them. Say it once, and you may get lucky that the trail goes cold. That their senses are diluted, and you escape. Say it twice, well at that point you're playing with fire. You're taunting something that not even your worst nightmares could come close to touching. They will not hunt you down instantly. No, all things take time in this world. They do not move fast, but they move at a steady pace. They will find you. Whether it be days, weeks, months, or years. Well, that depends on just how evasive you manage to be. But don't worry, they all catch up eventually. I'm writing this to you simply because I have made that mistake. Once when I was young, I read the name out loud in a folklore book while trying to sound it out. Strike one. The second mistake I made just last month at a trivia night at my local bar. The question referred to the mythical creatures of terror in Navajo folklore, and I guess after one too many shots, the name slipped out of my mouth. I know they're coming for me. It's only a matter of time. I'm going to keep a running log. It's the only way I'll stay sane. Maybe somebody will stumble upon this and finally get some mainstream knowledge on this legend. Navajo tribes are extremely tight-lipped about this subject for good reason. Skinwalkers respond to audible sounds of their names. They aren't like demons from exorcism movies who have proper names. No, these things all go by their standard names of Skinwalker, Wendigo, or Yinaldlushii. For simplicity, to save myself the time, they'll be skinwalkers from here on out. Nobody knows the true figure of skinwalkers. There's accounts from those who were lucky enough to escape for just long enough. Skinwalkers are genderless, gaunt, pale figures. They stand 7 to 8 feet tall. At times they move to all fours and crawl around with the grace of a tiger or lion, yet most are comfortable and mobile on their 2 feet as bipedals. Some take on the shape of a moose head with the long and wide paddle-like antlers. Some purely take the shape of a human face with barely recognizable features. The best I can describe their human appearance is similar to the Slender Man stories, of a tall and elongated thin man with no face. They don't kill you, not instantly. They slowly drive you mad. They thrive on the mental breakdown that you begin to feel every time you think you see them. The more that you mentally bleed out with your insanity, the more that come near. Navajo legend is that more appear to quicken the breakdown, but the initial responder is the only one who gets the kill. Now for the fun part. Skinwalkers survive on flesh and emotional distress. They don't destroy a body, only the essence of the human spirit. They inhabit the flesh of those they kill, They walk around wearing their kill's skin, allowing them to blend in among the public. They never look fully there, they look as though they are wearing a semi-expensive Halloween costume. To those that aren't paying attention, nobody bats an eye. But if you really look hard, you'll see the absence of life in their eyes. You'll notice how clumsily they string sentences together. You'll notice that their mouth doesn't seem to sync up with what the tongue is saying. Imagine a museum of wax, with all the perfect collections of human replications. Imagine those being heated to about 85 degrees Fahrenheit, just enough to start becoming deformed. Maybe the wax expands in certain areas. Facial features don't match the mood they seem to be expressing. That's a skin walker. There's a good chance you've walked past a couple in your life, but maybe you were just too wrapped up in that Facebook post. They absorb your mental distress, whether it's thoughts, emotions, memories, etc. It's been said that they speak to people in voices that are familiar to their prey. You can hear people that have been dead 40 years or hear somebody you just talked to earlier in the day. They are tricksters, more or less. The hunt is more than half the fun to them. The Midwestern Canada tribes depicted the Wendigos as giant coyotes. It's fitting really, they hunt in packs, there's a leader, they torment their prey, and are incredibly vocal. I'm sure you're asking yourself, damn, this kid sure knows a lot about a legend that the people don't talk about. Well, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. You want to know how I found out? Because these fuckers have found me. They've been visible a few times, but I can feel them around me at all times. I can feel their fucked up, soulless eyes on me everywhere. The worst? Trying to fucking sleep. I'm too afraid to sleep with my lights off. There's too much moonlight pouring into my bedroom, which only gives me the opportunity to see the shadows fall across my bedroom floor. If I close the shades, I can hear them scratching at the windows trying to get a view. If I leave the lights on, it's impossible to see what's on the other side of the window. Do you want to know what's scarier than being stalked by deformed, half-melted humans? Not knowing if they are on the outskirts of your property or if they are right in front of your window staring at your every move. I haven't been able to tell how good their sight is at night. I've watched them at night as much as they have watched me. I don't see the Reaper ever during the day. The Reaper is what I call the one coming after me. I'm not sure if it's the same one, but I can just feel it is. I first spotted it at the edge of my tree line in my yard. It was about 2 days after I said it for the second time. I knew what it was right when I saw it. It was a milky figure about 50 yards from me. I couldn't just brush it off because it didn't magically disappear like how all other ghost stories have the apparition conveniently disappear instantly. Nope, I had to stare down with that motherfucker for 6 hours. It saw me, and I saw it. Now, partially the stare down happened because I froze up with fear. I felt like I was in a trance. Something gripped my attention. I knew it could see me, but I felt that it recognized I was aware as well. I sank to my knees after about 2 hours. Only the top of my head would have been visible. About 2 minutes after sinking down, it began to slowly move sideways through the tree line. Almost as if it believed I had given up. The second I popped up, it froze. I tested this theory a few times and the result was the same. It couldn't make out the top of my head, which makes me believe the vision isn't as good as mine is. I also do not think the critical thinking is there, as I ran through the same cycle about 5 times without it picking up. The skinwalkers seem to run on instinct alone, patterning their behaviors on what they see. The biggest problem they have is that they do not interact with other humans, they simply float along. This makes them easiest to spot once trying to converse with one. They're awkward, clumsy, and again, the reactions don't match. Have you seen somebody fake laugh? That's how they respond to what they think is a joke, a fake belly-style laugh. However, they fail to move their eyebrows, squint their eyes, and smile in a similar manner. I discovered my first and only true skinwalker 2 days ago while I was out to lunch. I had stopped to open the door for somebody walking out of a local burger joint. I opened it for them and said, "There you go," and tried to slip in the door. The skinwalker stopped just outside the door and responded with a "You're welcome," and a big toothy grin, like they were smiling for a dentist taking X-rays. The eyes seemed to be bubbly and watery, almost like how I would imagine a caricatured dog's eyes would look. The skin around them was saggy, yet the forehead skin was pulled so tight. I gave an incredulous look, sort of stunned at how awful this thing was. It responded with that god-awful fake belly laugh. The more intense the laugh got, the more freaked out I got. The face itself became almost hazy, like somebody was turning on one of those anonymous filters in front of it. In a split second the face snapped back to normal, and the thing simply walked off. I don't know, it gives me the creeps the ways the eyes sort of wobbled back and forth. It still makes my hair stand up. I don't want to believe I'm going through this. I don't want to believe that I saw a human-like moose crawling around on all fours, peering from around the side of my shed last night as I took out my trash. I don't want to believe that 5 days ago, a random stranger knocked on my door asking to borrow a spark plug because his car was out of gas, while holding his hands out in a thumbs-up position. When I told him I couldn't help him, he said adios and just walked away with an ever so slight haze around him. I don't want to believe that I'm hearing the voice of my ex-wife pleading to let her in from the cold as I hear faint tapping on my front door. But let me tell you, it's real. It's all real and happening to me here. This isn't like a video game. I don't have some goddamn progress bar to let me know how close these things are to me. I don't know how much time there is left. They seem close, but nobody is moving in on me yet. Whatever you do, do not say any of this out loud, otherwise I can assure you, you'll be in a similar situation to me. I'm sitting here typing this up as I can see the skinwalker just sitting on my shed. Waiting. Waiting for me to finally break. To slip up and open my door the next time it mimics my grandma's voice. To say its name out loud one more time to strengthen its hold on me. Maybe I'm on a cusp, just far enough gone to where I'll be hunted forever. Maybe they are taking their time to wear me down. I wish I had answers. I only have problems. Fuzzy-faced, emotionally disturbed, mutant moose-sized problems. I just went to my bedroom to get away from the scratching outside my front door. Every window has fog on one of the corners, I'm presuming from one of those things breathing right outside the window, steaming it up. I can see one of them right now as I sit on my bed. It's sitting with just the top of its eyes and head visible. The eyes are sunken back into the oversized sockets. I can see the veins in the eyeballs glowing a fluorescent blue, highlighting the inflamed red around the eye sockets. The eyebrows are at an odd height up on the forehead, as if they started drifting upwards from their normal location. I can see it sizing me up, I feel like I'm being tasted via the sense of sight. It started whimpering to me in the infant voice of my brother. "Let me in, please let me in. I'm freezing out here. How can you just knowingly let me freeze? I'm dying out here. Please just help me. Open the window so I can warm up. Please," and shit like that on repeat. It's really doing a damn good job at driving me insane. I'm half tempted to just open the window and get it over with. These things have been in Navajo culture for thousands of years, probably dating back to the times before paper. How I am supposed to stop something that hasn't been stopped in thousands of years. I'm another statistic. The only hope I have is to eliminate their food supply. Everything starves, right? Maybe by spreading this story, the skinwalkers will start to disappear. Maybe they'll go into hiding or a hibernation. I wouldn't count on it though. They seem to know what they are doing. So for those of you reading this, just be careful. Tonight, tomorrow, next week, next year. I don't know if the skinwalkers pick up on technical transmitted signals. Maybe they don't yet, but at some point they might adapt. So if you hear a tapping at your window tonight, don't turn over in your bed to check it out. If you see steam in the corner of your living room window, don't go out front to check it out. If you hear somebody knocking at your door unexpectedly, take a quick peek first. Pay attention to people's hand motions while talking, their facial expressions and reactions. They're out there. They may be after you next. Slowly closing in on your whereabouts, awkwardly bumping into you and feasting on the nights that you can't sleep. Or maybe they got to me by time you read this. There's no way of telling. Then again, maybe I didn't write this. Maybe they did. Maybe they do respond to you just thinking the name, saying it over and over in your head. Guess you'll find out. Sixth story. Wendigo, but something odd happened. When I was 8 years old, both of my parents worked full-time. My dad was predominantly on third shift at his job, and my mom was an elementary school teacher. We lived literally right up the road from my grandparents in a very small town. It was getting close to my 9th birthday when I contracted strep throat and scarlet fever. I was severely sick, could barely speak, had the first case of cold sweats that I remember in my life, and could barely pull myself out of bed to even use the restroom. I was absolutely miserable, and of course, being as young as I was, I didn't take the pain very well. My poor mother was at a loss of what to do with her working and my dad needing to use daylight hours to sleep. The first day I was sick, perhaps it was a Tuesday. My birthday would fall on a Friday. My dad stayed up most of the day with me, made me food, let me sleep in his lap on the couch, wiped my forehead down, made sure I took my medicine, etc. But on the second day, my grandmother had called and offered to let me stay at her house so my dad could sleep. He said yes and woke me up around 7 that morning to drive me up to her home. My grandfather also worked at this time too, so he was already gone to work when I arrived there. I don't remember too much of the early morning. I probably just slept in my grandmother's bed, tossing and turning when I'd wake up feeling extra bad. She encouraged me to swallow my awful tasting medicine, a little more gently than my dad did. She did fix me some tomato soup to try and eat, and it was the first time since I'd gotten sick that I had an appetite. I should mention my grandmother had this cute Yorkshire Terrier named Samson. He was very docile, not like the usual annoying, barking all the time terriers. Samson came into the room and curled up next to me as I dozed. I do know when I woke up at some point, it had to be the early afternoon/lunch time because I could hear the TV faintly from the living room on some game show. My grandmother had a ritual of eating her lunch while watching a game show. I think it was The Price is Right. I was trying to fall back asleep because I had gotten this really bad headache, maybe from dehydration. I was on the verge of sleep when I was jolted awake by the Samson yelp that erupted from the living room. The terrier curled up next to my feet, perked up, but didn't move. I knew I had heard his name being called too, but it was odd he didn't respond. Samson. My grandmother called again. Samson. Samson. The dog still didn't run out of the room to her. I was confused, as he was so obedient to my grandmother. He was almost frozen, staring at the cracked open door but making no attempt to go to her. She called, "Samson," maybe 3 or 4 more times. Then I got annoyed. I remember flinging the covers off of me. Of course my clothes are sticky with sweat and I just generally feel uncomfortable and groggy. I stumble out of the room wiping my eyes, asking, "Grandma, do you need Samson?" "He's in your room with me." I'm in the living room and I have to do a double take. The TV is still on and blaring. There's a bowl of soup sitting on the coffee table and an open Pepsi next to it, but my grandmother isn't anywhere in the room. Maybe she's in the bathroom? I crossed the room and went past the kitchen, empty too. I got to the bathroom door which was shut, and knocked. Nothing. I then opened it. No one was in there. The house is empty. It's not a huge house either, I've covered all of the rooms. So yes, my first reaction was to get scared. I could clearly hear my grandmother calling for the dog but she's not anywhere inside. I can feel my hands and feet get all tingly. I start shouting for my grandma, but my voice is just echoing through the small, cramped home. Samson had gotten up at this point and was sitting near the couch, looking completely undisturbed. I fumbled for the remote and turned the TV off, and yelled, more like wheezed, to the top of my lungs, which you can imagine how painful this was with a scratchy, infected throat, "Grandma." The worst part happened next. I heard her shouting my name back. Clear as ever, like she was standing only feet away. I start crying now, scared out of my mind. I feel like maybe it has to be a ghost. I grew up with scary ghost stories courtesy of my dad and I'm convinced now I'm in the room with a ghost. And then she/whatever this was, proceeded to call my name again. Then, there was a second voice, definitely not my grandmother's. It was deeper, definitely more masculine, and absolutely terrifying as it shouted, "Come to the front door." I did not do that. Instead I made sure to run back to my grandparents' bedroom, lock the door, and pick up the telephone on their nightstand. I called my own home phone and my dad's sleepy voice answered. Through a barely comprehensible voice, I managed to croak something like, "Daddy, there's someone in the house and I can't find Grandma. She's gone." My dad of course said he jumped out of bed, grabbed his Swiss Army knife he kept in a drawer next to the bed, and ran down the road to the house in his PJs and bare feet. He ran up to the front door, jiggled the handle, it was locked. So he made his way around and since he knew the garage code, just punched it in and got inside. A quick sweep of the 3 rooms of the home showed no one was in there. It's not like there was really anywhere to hide. I ran out of the room once I was sure he was there and began bawling in his arms. He kept reassuring me there was no one here, and then asked if I did know where Grandma possibly was. I said I hadn't, and explained I'd woken up to her calling for Samson but she hadn't been anywhere there. This was back when cell phones were definitely around, but there were no iPhones and my grandparents certainly wouldn't have been buying them anyway. My dad had one but not on him at the time. I could tell he was trying to keep calm, so he just said we would need to go back to our house. I was sure he was probably going to call the police at that point just because my grandma still hadn't popped up and her car had been in the garage when he got in. If she'd left, she'd gone on foot. We hadn't even made 2 steps out of the driveway when from my grandma's neighbor's house, my grandma was strolling out, chatting to the neighbor. She saw my dad and then me, crying my eyes out, and immediately ran over to see what was wrong. She was super apologetic. She said she'd stepped out right when she'd heated up her soup to go see her neighbor, who'd called about looking at something my grandma was going to buy. My grandma had figured I was asleep and she'd only be gone for 10 or 15 minutes. At first people may have assumed I was feverish, therefore delusional, but I still stand by what happened. I know for a fact I was definitely alone in the house, save for Samson, but the voices I heard were real. For a while I was hesitant to go back to my grandma's house, because this happened in the middle of the day. I later read stories at school about Wendigos, or creatures that would disguise their voices to lure people. This was the closest explanation I could ever form about what I heard. I never shared to anyone that I thought it was for sure a Wendigo, and chalked it up to maybe just a ghost. I'm close to my 20s now. Last year was the first time I shared this story fully to my grandpa, who used to just say that fever must have made me had bad dreams. We were sitting on the front porch of the house, smoking cigarettes and exchanging anecdotes. When I finished telling him, for the first time he looked sort of disturbed about it. He finally put his cigarette out and just stared out into the road. Then he cleared his throat and looked over at me. "You know," he said slowly. "Some funny things used to happen around that time. In the middle of the night, I'd wake up to take a piss or something. When I'd first sit up in the bed, I could hear your grandma sleeping away, snoring." He chuckled, but his face grew serious again. "Anyways, I'd always hear her calling for the dog. I tried to remain looking calm, but my voice still shook when I asked him even when she was sleeping. Sleep talking?" "No," he shook his head. "I heard her calling from outside, maybe the living room. I dunno, honey. She'd call for the dog, she'd call my name. All while she was really sleeping next to me, sleeping like a baby." "Have you ever told anyone?" "No, I don't want to scare her. She's real scared of ideas like ghosts and stuff. That's why when you were younger and that thing happened, I told her just to remember you'd been sick, fever and all. Probably having nightmares." He looked gravely at me. "Don't repeat this to her, please, honey. She's really not the type to be scaring." Of course, I wanted to cry. I had this itchy, creepy feeling suddenly about being at the house. "Grandpa, do you still hear it sometimes?" "Oh yes," he was now reaching into his breast pocket to get out another cigarette. "Every night, but you just gotta remember not to do what it says. Even the dog figured it out. If it says to come to the door, you stay away from the door. If it says, I dunno, come here, you just stay still in the room until it quits calling." With that, he asked to borrow my lighter again. 7th story. This story was shared by u/Worcester_st. It turns out that the scratches didn't come from a bear after all. My wife Steph and I have been together for about 2 years now. We met at college, and hit it off right away. Steph was orphaned when she was very young, so she'd been raised by her grandfather until she went off to school and met me. I didn't know much about her grandfather other than that he was extremely protective of her, almost verging on paranoid. Still, he passed away before I got the chance to meet him, so I never really gave him much thought other than to comfort Steph. That was, until we found out that he owned something like 900 acres of forest. Steph was his only living descendant, so she was given the deed, and a key ring pertaining to a house that she'd never seen before. What a 23-year-old girl was going to do with all that, I don't know. All I know was that when she told me about her new land, I knew we had to go check it out. As we drove up, I asked her if she'd been to this house in the forest before. She said, "Listen, I didn't even know this land existed. I have no idea why Gramps would keep it from me." It was pretty clear that she was still taking his death pretty hard. No wonder really, he'd basically raised her after all. The drive up into the mountains from our college took a couple hours. The forest was thick with pine and oak trees growing close to the road. The further we got from civilization, the worse the roads got. Potholes, broken branches, and even grass had begun to sprout out in some places. Our plan was to stay the night at the house, but if that didn't pan out we brought a tent as well. Our GPS had us turn off on a gravel road. This road wound and twisted around turns and rocky outcroppings. It was pretty clear that it was leading us down into a valley. After half an hour or so on this new road, we saw the house out in front of us. The house had clearly been abandoned for decades. I had brought my camera with us, so I took a picture of it right as we stepped out of the car. Steph was pretty clearly disappointed. Well, I guess it was too much to hope someone would be caring for it all this time. Stretching my legs after all that time in the car was really nice. Steph walked up to the house to check it out. I warned her that the ground might be rotted out, and to be careful. I started walking around the house, and took another picture. I'll link it here. I came back to the house and walked in the front door. The inside was a mess, all rotten wood and dirt. I was honestly surprised it was still standing at all. I stuck my head back outside, and my eye caught on something. There was a tree growing just to the right of the house. I saw 4 long deep claw marks in it, a few months old at least. I raised my camera and took a picture. That was when I heard Steph shriek. I ran back around to the front of the house and saw her standing in front of something rotten. When I took a closer look I saw it was a deer carcass. I told Steph that we were most definitely in bear country, then took a picture of the deer. Only thing was, it looked like the deer had been cut open with a bunch of razor blades. Bears don't normally do that. I'll link the picture here. Warning, this is a picture of a rotting deer body. The sun soon set after that. We took out our tent inside the house and found a nice flat spot to set it up. I busted out my gas grill and made us a couple of hamburgers. We were sitting in our camp chairs inside the house, and feeling pretty good by the time it got completely dark. Steph was looking at me pretty amazed. I asked her why she was so surprised. It's just, I've never been camping before. It's different than I imagined. She looked down at her phone. Less cell service at least. I decided to ask some more about Steph's grandpa. Why do you think he never told you about any of this? And why didn't he ever take you camping? I asked. I don't know. I went on for a while about how cool I thought the property was, plans for future parties with friends, bonfires, all that. Clouds had rolled in, so all the light was just from our little lantern I'd brought. Pretty soon we headed inside the tent, zipped up the door, and were ready for bed. Steph had already fallen asleep when it happened. All the sounds from outside, all the crickets and birds and owls, all stopped. In an instant. Laying in my sleeping bag inside the tent, the silence was deafening. That was when I heard it. A distinct clicking noise echoed out from the forest. I lay in silence, trying to guess what kind of animal might have made that sound. It was so loud that Steph actually woke up next to me and asked what it was. I told her I didn't know. Then I heard the clicking noise again, extremely close. So close it seemed like it might be right next to the house. I slipped out of my sleeping bag, still inside the tent, and grabbed my camera. I walked up to the tent door, and zipped it down as quietly as I could. Then I stuck the camera out into the darkness, and took a picture. In the flash I saw a hand reaching through the broken window of the house. It almost looked human, but it was deathly white, and had long claws extending from each finger. Through the window I saw what looked like a human silhouette with 2 bright yellow eyes staring in towards us. I can't be sure, but it looked like there was blood around its mouth. I pulled the camera back and zipped the tent door closed. Steph sat up. "What is it?" she asked. I moved next to her and covered her mouth with my hand. My heart was racing and I felt all the hairs on my body standing up. I had no idea what I was supposed to do. Silence. For a long moment I heard nothing. Then the clicking sound echoed out from where I knew the front door of the house was. Steph stared at me, her eyes clearly confused and afraid. She put her hand on mine and tried to pull it away, but I shook my head and didn't take it off. Silence again. I strained to hear, but nothing. For what must have been 2 minutes I sat with my hand on Steph's mouth. Then I heard the clicking from just a few feet outside our tent door. I have no idea how it got so close without making any sound. I froze for a moment. Then, as quietly as I could, I reached into my pants laying on the ground and pulled out my car keys. I hit the unlock button twice. My car's horn beeped loudly from where we'd parked in front of the house. Silence again. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I heard the clicking from out where my car was parked in front of the house. The clicking echoed out a few more times, but each one was further and further away. After half an hour or so, the cricket started back up and the forest sounded alive again. Steph stared at me. "What did you see?" I told her to get dressed, and to be ready to run. We got dressed in the tent, and I opened the door. We ran to where my car was, jumped in it, and sped away. I didn't stop until we reached home. The next morning I went out to my car and saw this on the hood. Has anyone had experiences like this? I'll update the story if anything new happens. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.